Anna, hello.
Hello from Ljubljana.
Hi. We've never met, so it's nice to see you. And first of all, I'd just like to say I enjoyed translating the novel. I must admit, sometimes I cursed you because the language was quite difficult. It wasn't the easiest book I've translated, but I enjoyed the process, and I enjoyed when I'd finished reading it through, because somehow when you're translating, you never quite know what it's going to be like really until you've finished, you know. So I was quite happy at the end when I read it through. Uh, I thought, oh, you know, people are going to hopefully get a good idea of the novel. So really today we want to find out a bit more about you and about the book. So I was going to start with a very routine question, really, and that is, if you could just tell us a bit about how you became a writer. Was it something you always wanted to do, or did you sort of grow into it?
I always had a relationship towards language. I think it started really early when I was a child because I read a lot. I also wrote a lot, although I didn't show my pieces to anyone. And then by chance, I started working for a newspaper, and there I think my relationship to language and to writing became something more serious. And at a certain point in my life, I realized I do not just want to reproduce reality in the form of news or critiques, that I would like to maybe construct something, some fiction. And when I was, I think, 27 or 26, I wrote my first short story that was then published. I had a lot of drama. I wrote a lot of drama pieces before, but I never showed this to anybody because it was worthless, basically. And once I got a taste of how it is to construct a story, how it is to relate to fiction, I kind of became in love with the process and with what this offers, basically. So it was not a conscious choice. I think I was kind of pulled into it because I always lived in the realm of language.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned drama, because I felt that, just jumping ahead slightly, that there were some very intense dramatic scenes between the main characters, especially the three who were involved four really, in the love triangle, and it's I could imagine the thing being staged, although of course, you know, it happens in various locations, but there was a kind of dramatic quality there.
It's interesting you
Um,
mentioned, oh, sorry.
yeah,
It's interesting you mentioned this because I do, when I construct scenes, I do see them, I do feel through my characters a little bit, but I also try to enter the scene as if it was exposed, or as if it was a dispositive on stage, basically. So yeah, probably that's my inclination towards drama.
so this is your first novel. Your first book was a book of short stories, which was very well received in Slovenia. How different was the writing experience?
Completely, really. Before I wrote this novel, I never wrote a longer piece. Actually, my longest was probably 20, 30 pages in Word, you know. I had to learn how to keep pace with character development. I had to learn how to create scenes consecutively. I had to learn how to love my characters for a longer period of time, because with short stories, you drop them very quickly. It's really a very strong infatuation or a very strong interest, but then it burns out really quickly. The novel is a longer process, so it demanded from me that I delve into these protagonists much deeper, and I think I learned a lot through it also, how to build a character, how to stay with them.
Maybe it's a kind of cliche that in short stories there is no character development, but obviously in the novel there is. Did it surprise you at all the way the characters developed? Did they change from your original or initial conception?
Very much. I actually constructed, in my head, I constructed the story very differently from what it became, because through writing I learned more about who I actually created. So their actions and their decisions had to have some plausible consequences, and I followed these consequences. I followed their flow, not the flow I imagined or that I wanted to impose on them. So it ended up very differently from what I imagined, and I have the same experience now from writing the second novel. I constructed a crime story with which I wanted to get to a certain place, but then I just veered off into something completely different again. I tried to pay my respect to who I create.
How many dead ends did you follow in this process of?
In writing Mojstrovina, or the masterpiece, it was probably a lot, because I threw a lot away. What I wanted to do just didn't fit the essence. Although I don't really believe in essence really when it comes to character development, but what I intended was completely different from what my people in the book needed. So yeah, it was a very long process. I think I worked on it for 2 years, and it's not a very long book, so there was a lot of negotiation.
Yeah, I think one of the strengths of the book is, it's a short novel, but it packs a lot into that short space. And, just as a general comment, I feel often that there's a tendency these days for writers to overproduce in terms of 400 or 500 pages, and I think there was a clear process here of editing going on. Maybe probably your editing, of getting rid of inessential things, and just the focus of the novel is quite small, really, isn't it? In the sense of not many characters. Really, there are only about 6 sort of significant characters.
Yes, you're right. I wanted to keep my focus as narrow as possible. On one hand, because I didn't have the technical skills still to develop a larger panoramic view over a series of characters. There was my kind of a lack of knowledge. On the other side, on the other hand, I had a clear vision of what the problems or the questions were that I wanted to ask with this writing. So I didn't veer away from this. This is the only thing I stayed true to in the process. Everything else changed, basically. But my primary interests were there. Yeah.
Yeah. You seem very interested in what makes people tick in their psychology. Was that one of the main sort of motivations or driving forces in you becoming a writer, trying to understand what goes on in people's heads?
Definitely. I've always been an observer. So you learn a lot by observing people or nature, You learn a lot of what they desire, what they think they desire, how their desire develops, how it falls apart, how it changes. And it's a very strong part of me, and it also became my poetics, I think. Dealing with people, I'm not that much interested in the plot. I'm not a plot-ridden or driven writer.
Yeah.
So I translate these interests into, well, my writing. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. I mean, certainly with regard to the two main characters, there is a lot of, well, there's quite a bit of dialogue, just direct dialogue. There's also quite a bit of indirect dialogue in the sense of you sort of summarizing what was going through somebody's head, and I found those passages quite fascinating. Maybe because it's something that I find difficult, sort of understanding what motivates people and so on. Does it make your friends nervous? Do they feel that, oh my God, she's watching us and trying to work out what's going through our mind and our motivation and so on?
I think it's fair to say that we writers are exploiters to a certain extent. I do exploit people for my writing, not in a very dramatic or direct sense, but I get to learn a certain person or certain people, and I create a new character out of the compounds of these people. So the more people I get to know, or the more people I get to observe, the more convincing my characters, the characters I write, can be, of course. So yeah, there's a danger in me, of me exploiting my friends. I mean, I usually take some features from people I know, because it's very easy for me to lean into this because I meet these people every day. So I'm also motivated to stay with the characters more. Yeah, it might not be the most, how can I say, PR thing to say that, we writers are exploiters, but I think that's the truth. It's an exploitative gift.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. Well, there've been enough examples, haven't there, of conflict arising due to writers exploiting friends and family as characters and this kind of thing. We won't go into that, and I won't ask you if you've based your characters on any particular individuals. One thing that interests me as a youngish woman, how do you find it more difficult to read men, or let's say to read middle-aged men, such as, one or two of the characters in the book?
I do have a problem with this lately, maybe because I was born into, well, not really born into, but I was learned to believe that the best literature was already written. So what I read was usually very old, written by a certain type of men, mostly white, heterosexual, European or American. Then I realized at a certain point that this is not the only scope literature can offer. So I started to explore other more marginal voices as well. And it's not that I am against or very opposed to male writing at the moment. It's just that I need to use my time wisely. So I need to explore what else is out there. I'm not a militant feminist in this sense, but I need to level what I have learned throughout my education, basically, a little bit.
It's interesting because I've been translating in Slovenia for about 20 years. I've translated about a dozen novels, and this is the first one by a woman. Which probably reflects something of the literary scene in Slovenia, although it is changing. It's changed, I think, quite a lot in the last 20 years, but it used to be very dominated by men, didn't it?
It did, for sure.
That was my impression.
Yeah, I think in the last years there was, we can witness a rise in female voices, which I'm excited about this.
Yeah.
Because, female writers can offer new perspectives, new types of stories, new types of characters, basically, that the males weren't able to offer because our lived experience is so different from each other
Yeah.
still. And I'm glad that this is happening, finally. And of course, I'm also waiting for the moment that maybe more marginal voices will start writing and producing art in Slovenia.
Yeah.
But we're such a tight, small community that it might not happen very soon.
Yeah, because when I read in English, I'm sure probably 2/3 or 3/4 of the books I read are by women. That's not a deliberate choice. It just there seem to be a lot of very good women writers around in English these days, and often very young women writers as well, which is interesting. So it's no longer a kind of male profession being a novelist, if it ever was, but there are a lot of women's voices.
Yeah, I think
and in Slovenia, it's good that is happening.
In Slovenia, we have a saying that zgledi vlečejo, so maybe you can translate this. Good cases kind of pull, they give momentum. And I think that we, contemporary female writers in Slovenia, give momentum to generations to come, basically. And, the British scene is a little bit different because women have been writing for a longer time. There's been more generations, so there's more contemporary authoresses as well. It's not the case here in Slovenia. We have just witnessed the birth of female voices.
So to come perhaps a bit closer to the book and what it's about, the events of the book take place at a time I assume you have no personal memories of. What drew you to that period? And perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about, the basic story, if you like, of when, where, what.
So the novel takes place between in the second part of the 80s, basically, in a time where in Slovenia people could already feel the momentum or the desire for independence from Yugoslavia. Although I don't think that this desire was very, well constructed in people's minds. I think that they just wanted to get away from this big federation, basically. I don't really believe there was a vision to what a society needs to be created or what kind of politics they wanted. They just wanted a change. Anyways, in the book we follow an affair basically between a young editor, Ana Miller, who works for a big publishing company in Slovenia, and a professor who also moves in the dissident circles. It might be a very simple relationship, but they are entangled in a problem because Ana is also working for the secret police as an informant, and she is supposed to basically spy on Adam's activities because Ana's handlers believe he might be a dangerous dissident or that the circles he moves in might be dangerous to the stability of Yugoslavia. Their relationship goes up in flames, but I will not maybe reveal.
Don't spoil the plot.
Okay, I will not spoil the plot. I chose this time firstly because I have a very strong inclination towards the 80s and the 70s, as my trousers would show, but unfortunately you can't see them. Anyways, the 80s for me are interesting globally in international sense because I think it was a very vibrant time when it comes to music production, art production, thought production, a very lively time. And in Slovenia, we could witness the birth of different counterculture movements that had their own visions or ideas of what Slovenia or what society should become. A vibrant time. That's one part of my interest. The other part is maybe more intimate because of growing up in an atmosphere where this myth of the Slovenian independence was so prevalent. So I wanted to delve into this myth because I do really believe it's a myth. I do not think that the actors of that time had a strong vision for Slovenia, really, which I think that we live this reality today.
Yeah. Did you, were there any tensions in your family? Was it a family with connections with other Yugoslav republics, or are you from a kind of more a pure Slovene background, if you like?
My family is very, how can I say, all the protagonists in my family represent very different political streams. I mean, there were people that were part of the Communist Party, people that were not, people that lived right across the border from Austria that had more like kind of Germanic, how can I say, inclinations, or that were more interested in Austria than Slovenia. My heritage is very colorful. So I think that the fact that it's so colorful also draws me to that time a lot, because I want to find answers for myself and understand what was going on the brink between the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah.
Because the stories we are sold as millennials are, the narratives we are sold are they're very uniform, they're very unison, and I, as a young thinker, try to oppose this uniform narratives, of course.
Yeah. So your main character, Anna, is basically an informer for the secret police. Do you expect readers to condemn her or understand her? What sort of reaction were you expecting?
Whatever works for the readers, basically, because I think people have the right to respond as they wish. Of course, certain people can condemn this. I very rarely condemn people for their actions or decisions, because the more you understand them, the less you can judge, which is a very strange double bind. It's a very strange bind to be in, because there's of course certain actions that people take that are to be judged. I think that she's not such an extreme character that she would deserve the guillotine. But of course, she made some questionable choices in her life, which can make sense to somebody that has maybe the same ambitions or the same drives as she does. Because her main problem is her drive, her ambition, her desire for life to move really quickly, to gain as much as possible from life. This is why she decides to join, to work with the secret police. It's not because of her political conviction or anything else. It's opportunism.
Yeah, there is a kind of implication that if she hadn't become an informer, that she would not have advanced in the publishing world.
Yeah, also because, it was very hard for women in the 80s to claim such positions of power, let's say, in any institution. Even though Yugoslavia was probably a bit different from what people imagine, because women still had a very strong stance. You know, it was not a totalitarian state in which women would only bear children and take care of domestic chores. Women were quite emancipated, but still it was a very patriarchal society. So she needed to, Anna in the novel needed to negotiate with this reality, and she decided to do a bad thing to gain more for her life, basically.
Perhaps readers are more familiar with dissidents in places like Poland and East Germany, where perhaps the consequences were more serious. Could you say a little bit about, what was likely to befall dissidents in Slovenia in particular in the 1980s?
Not much, really.
What did they risk?
Not much. I mean, the dissidents maybe face the possibility of some sort of professional demotion, so of being displaced professionally, but there were no prison sentences, no exiles for them. You know, it was still a very peaceful time where the regime was slowly dissolving, and it didn't have as much momentum as in the time of the Informbureau in the 50s or the 60s, where dissidents could actually face severe punishment. Yugoslavia was not as extreme. It was very different to what people imagine. The countries were behind the Iron Curtain, you know, because Yugoslavia was not behind the Iron Curtain, really.
and Slovenia was somewhat different from, let's say, Serbia, wasn't it?
Also,
in
yeah.
terms of possible risks of being a dissident.
Yeah, it's also, I think that it has a
the
lot.
most liberal of the.
I think it has a lot to do also with where we're positioned. You know, where we were positioned in Yugoslavia, that we were quite away from the center. So, you know, kilometer by kilometer, this power kind of dissolved. And of course, we were also open to the West, even though I don't really support this type of this notion. But yeah, this influenced Slovenia a lot, I think, in how people treated potential political threats.
Yeah. And after all, people used to go shopping, didn't they, in Italy and Austria, and it wasn't as if they were cut off from
the world. It's very different, as I said, from what people imagine Yugoslavia was. And sometimes I fear that Slovenes, when there was the plebiscite, so the referendum for independence, I fear that people just wanted to have access to things, not really to democracy as such. So, but that's my cynical view of political processes, I think.
Okay. We won't go into that because I don't want to get you into trouble.
Yeah, thank you.
And it's probably for non-Slovene listeners, it's perhaps, you know, a bit difficult to relate to. Another question then, would you agree that the two main female characters, Anna and Vera, are much stronger than the two main male characters, or their partners, Adam and Sergei? And does this tell us anything about the way you view men and women?
I have a problem with the notion of strength because I don't really know what that would mean. I think that Anna and Vera maybe just know themselves a little bit better. That's why they can take certain decisions that might seem emancipatory. They just follow a certain set of decisions because they know themselves. I'm not a very big proponent of this confidence feminism, you know, in which women have to be very strong and decisive in order to be able to compete in the patriarchal system. I'm not a proponent of the idea that women need to suppress their vulnerabilities to be able to be viewed as human. Or to have equal rights. So I don't view women as strong or as vulnerable. I just view them as humans as much as possible. It's more a coincidence that the male characters in this book seem a little bit weaker. They're just more comfortable, I think. I think that's their main problem. I mean, Sergei has no incentive to move anywhere because he's comfortable, and Adam is also comfortable in his marriage to a certain degree and in his professional life to a certain degree. They just don't have the extra push that the females do.
Because Adam, well, he has it easy, doesn't he, in the sense that his wife is not happy to accept, but she accepts, for instance, his infidelities. And she also has very high opinion of his his talent and his writing abilities. So he has a lot of support.
He does.
My impression with him was one of inertia, perhaps, that he doesn't seem able to actually make any decisions, and perhaps he doesn't need to, because he can just vegetate in a fairly comfortable way.
Yeah, I think this is what I wanted to show, the difference between people who are in a constant friction in their reality, and this propenses them to move forward, and then people who, as you say, are inert or too comfortable and don't need to move anywhere out of discomfort. People usually don't leave comfortable seats because there's no reason to, really. I do not want to make such, how can I say, banal, even vulgar differences between males and females, but I can imagine that readers might see the female characters in this book as stronger than the male ones. But I think the problem lies somewhere else.
Right. Vera, I don't know if, probably English readers won't realize this, but the Slovene name has an implication of faith and trust. Was this a deliberate choice?
Yeah, it was.
That she has this kind of faith in Adam?
I basically made her a function in Adam's life. I mean, she's a sovereign character, but also a function to Adam. And Adam is very happy to have her as this function in his life because he needs more support than she does, basically. Vera, in comparison to Adam, is much more autonomous than he is, basically. So yeah, it was a deliberate choice.
But I mean, basically, she has dedicated her life to supporting him and massaging his ego, I suppose, hasn't she?
Yeah, negotiating with his ego as well. Yes.
Yeah. Did you ever feel annoyed with her as a character? Did you think, oh, come on, girl, why are you willing to accept this? Or were you trying to, as it were, stand back and try and understand?
It was more stepping back and trying to understand. I cannot write about people that I would judge. Of course, none of these characters are very likable, I think, in the book. The least likable probably is Sergei, I would say, so Anna's husband. But Vera is... I understand where she's coming from, and I understand that she made her husband into her life project, because I know this type of women. I don't judge them. And at the same time, it's also a very manipulative stance, Vera does get something out of this relationship. I mean, she gets a certain type of security that she also desires. So it's a contract. They're a company that functions very well because of her manipulation, basically. She's not a deceived woman. She's not a victim, she's a sovereign in her strange desire, so to say.
Yeah. Yes, well, when I was translating the book, it's interesting, you mentioned that none of the characters are likable. And at times, yes, I found it difficult to like them. Although I did warm to Anna, I must say, in spite of her being a police informer. But do you think that matters? I mean, do you think readers find it difficult to relate to a book if the characters are not likable?
Yes, I have this experience. I mean, I had readers tell me this, that why couldn't you just produce one protagonist that we could like or relate to instantly or feel compassion with instantly? But I think life doesn't work this way. I think we're all a little bit cruel and a little bit disgusting and a little bit off and a little bit unstable and not pretty. So I want to portray this reality in my writing as well. it's unfortunate if people would like, or if readers would like to relate instantly. I mean, it's much easier to identify with somebody who's very polished.
Yeah.
But I actually want to disturb. I'm really happy if people can relate to the protagonist through this disturbance as well. So they can see themselves in the weaknesses of others, not only in the strengths.
Yeah. Yeah, well, of course, you can't just set out to create pleasing characters. It's interesting because a couple of days ago, I read the first English review of the novel that the publisher sent us a copy. Mm-hmm. And she commented that Sophia and Vitomil, who are the secret police officers, come across as a nice old couple. How did you react to that?
I was surprised.
Did you notice that?
I read this and I was surprised that somebody warmed up to them. And this was not the first response like this that I got. Some people really liked Vitomil and Sofia because I think in them they see this gallant old couple that had certain ambitions but failed a little bit. And they're still, well-educated, well-behaved. They just do this very pressing and nasty job because they have to. They're not strong believers or strong supporters of the regime. They just do this like, people do their job. Even though I tried to portray Vitomil as somebody who has an inclination for violence as well. There's a certain spot in the novel where I write about a crack opening in the way he speaks. But yeah, I set out to write about an old, nice couple that does some nasty things.
I found them rather sinister, but perhaps because there's something kind of very smooth about the way they operate.
Yeah, because they had
it's
to
also
learn.
Interesting that they're a couple. But there is a scene, again, I won't spoil things, but there is a scene in a cafe or bar where it becomes clear that Anna is actually quite frightened of them, or perhaps frightened of what they can do to her. And I thought that was a very powerful scene because it's like she is a fly caught in a web and realizes that it's actually going to be very difficult for her to extricate herself from this.
Mm-hmm. Of course, she's aware of this for a while now. I mean, we meet her in the novel. We meet her when she becomes totally aware of the consequences of her youthful decisions, and of course, Vitomil and Sofia cannot do much to harm her really badly, but they can harm her reputation, they can harm her career, which of course for a woman of her stature and her ambition is a very big punishment. She worked so hard and she negotiated so much to get to where she is now, so she doesn't want to lose her position, her way in life, and she realizes she will have to, that there's no other way out of this arrangement than by not informing on her lover.
Without giving away the ending of the book, there is a twist. There is a twist at the end, let's say that. Did you have that in mind when you started?
Not really, but what I realized before I wrote the prologue, I just knew I wanted to, not prologue, but epilogue. I knew that I wanted to write an epilogue, so to kind of draw things together. Yeah. I didn't know what it was going to be, but when I read the novel, before continuing to the epilogue, I realized that it's written from maybe a more female perspective. And then I decided to stick with this and pack it up as I did. I don't want to spoil anything. Basically.
No, No, let's. It's always difficult to know how much to say. Coming back, you said that plot wasn't so important. Characters obviously are. What about style? Because as I said, I did find it hard work at times trying to capture this rather complex style. How conscious was this on your part, or is just this the way you write? I mean,
I don't have a writing style. I have a style that corresponds with the atmosphere I want to produce. And the atmosphere I wanted to produce in this novel was an atmosphere of melancholy, melancholia, yes, because of the time that I depicted, because it was, on one hand, a very vibrant time, but at the same time also very melancholic, because this is how I view it, because people knew they wanted a change, but didn't really know what it was, and melancholy is always a little bit visionary without having the right object. Without really having a specific object. So I wanted to depict melancholy with this style. And I always change my styles. I change registers if need be, because I want to stay true to either the atmosphere or the main narrator. So yeah, this was a conscious choice. It always is a conscious choice with me, because I believe language is my strongest tool, so I need to use it wisely, even though my translators might curse me a lot.
Yes, okay. It is perhaps, I don't know, my feeling as an outside observer is that often writing in Central Europe, and this includes Slovenia, is often more complex and perhaps more stylistically oriented, if you like. I mean, it's a generalization, than a lot of English writing. Mm-hmm. And I remember once talking to a student of mine on the bus in Ljubljana, and we were talking about literature and novels, and she mentioned one or two writers that I love, including Jane Austen and Charles Dickens. And she said, "Oh, I don't really like them." And I said, "Why not?" And she said, "There's no philosophy in them, and there's no philosophy, I would say, in your book, but there is a lot of psychology, perhaps more than you would find in most contemporary English writing." But this brings me on to just a broader question as to which writers you enjoy, and are there any writers who've inspired you?
I enjoy, well, lately I've been reading a lot of essays, so I really tend to forget what I like. The last thing I liked was a book by Catherine Angel, which is, it's a non-fiction book. But when it comes to fiction, to me, my savior, in a way, was David Foster Wallace, even though I do have a very strong opinion about his, let's say, life actions, because he showed me that I can turn my interest into literature, that I have the right to do this, that if I'm interested in people, I should follow this line as much as possible, because this is what he also did in his writing. And of course, he influenced me with his style, which is a little bit, how do you say, negeniran. It's not a controlled style, in a way. When it comes to females, I really adore Rachel Cusk, which is, of course, a British writer, especially with her trilogy, Outline, Kudos, and what's the last one? I forgot. Transit. It's Outline, Transit, Kudos, yes, and her essays. I like how I think she's a very philosophical author, despite being British. Yeah, to a certain degree, I agree with you that maybe the British authors are not as philosophical as the Slavic ones. I mean, on the Slavic part, we have a tradition of Dostoevsky, who was a big philosopher and psychologist as well. So yeah, Rachel Cusk is very important to me. Jane Austen is also very important to me. My head is so empty at this point. Marguerite Duras is very important to me. Simone de Beauvoir is very important to me with her autobiographical works and her fiction. Didier Eribon is also very important to me. There's a lot of influences in my life, but they change all the time because I read a lot. And I do forget a lot also, unfortunately.
It's always an awful question to be asked, isn't it? I wouldn't like to answer it, but it's often very tricky when you're just thrown into that position. But it sounds as if there's a very eclectic and also very international range of things that you read. If you read, I'm just curious to know, if you read British or American novels, let's say novels in English, do you read them in English or do you read them in translation?
I try to read everything I can in original. I'm a very avid user of Book Depository, sorry for product placement, but I do order a lot of books online because I want to read them in the original. Now I also decided to start reading in German again because I want to brush up on my German. But that's basically the languages I speak. It's German and English and Slovene. So this is what I have access to. Otherwise, I read in translation, although not much in the past years, I have to say.
Mm. Because obviously there is this enormous difference that, the British and American markets, tends to be around 2 or 3% of the books are translations. The Slovene market, it's more than half, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a very different situation.
Mm-hmm. It's much more eclectic.
I was kind of very impressed when I first came to Slovenia. Well, first of all, how many languages people know, because British people, we tend to be rather monolingual. But also, the people read often in several languages, which I think is probably quite unusual for British and American people, let's say, outside of academic circles. That's probably quite unusual, whereas it seems quite normal in Slovenia for people to pick up books, certainly in English and German and maybe Italian in some parts of Slovenia, and to read them in the original language.
I think that's one of the very rare positive consequences of colonialism, of not having a state or having a very complicated history. People had access to or were forced to maybe engage with different languages and adopt certain cultures or influences. So I think this is what would happen in Slovenia. The Brits, you have a different experience. You were on the other side always.
Yes. It's kind of all too easy if you're British just to wander around the world speaking English and assuming that everyone's going to understand you, and if they don't, you talk louder. But it's also kind of interesting because Slovenia has interacted with so many different languages, hasn't it? I mean, on the borders you have Italian, you have German, you have Croatian and
Hungarian,
Serbian, Hungarian, of course, which I don't suppose many people do read, but certainly the other languages, and it is normal to be multilingual.
And there's a beauty in this as well. I mean, I see how the fact that I know certain foreign languages also influences the relationship to my mother tongue. I think I'm able to experiment much more in my mother tongue because I speak other languages as well. I can implement the knowledge I get through German or English into Slovenian. I mean, it's a very strange process, but it's nice. It's good. It's helpful. It's healthy, I think.
Yeah. Could you imagine writing in English?
I tried, but I'm a perfectionist. If I don't have all the tools available, I become a little bit nervous. So
Yeah.
if I would have pitch perfect English, I probably would. Even though, sometimes you have to work with certain obstacles, just like, for instance, Keith Jarrett did with his famous Köln concert. Obstacles can be also very fruitful and productive. I'm just a little bit scared of writing in a foreign language.
I used to be quite amused when my students I used to teach in the translation department of the faculty. My students used to ask if they could write their assignments and seminar papers in English rather than Slovene. And I used to insist on Slovene. And I'd say, why do you want to write in English? And they tell me it's easier. Mm-hmm. Now, whether that was because they were cutting and pasting, I'm not sure. But it's interesting that a lot of young people almost feel, more at home in English in some ways, and perhaps a little bit afraid of Slovene.
I can understand this sentiment a little bit, because if you speak or write in a foreign language, I think your scope, your view is a little bit narrower, and working with within this narrow space can also be a little bit liberating, because you have to express a thought and you have these tools available, so you use all the tools you have and produce maybe something more truthful than you would if you would write in Slovene. In Slovene, because in Slovene, I think I'm very crafty. I can do a lot with my language, but sometimes I can do too much or express too much just because I'm so crafty. In English, I'm not as crafty, so maybe I could be more truthful or not. I'm just afraid to try it out at the moment.
Does Slovene, do you feel it represents a core part of your identity, or do you not have that sort of relationship to the language that a lot of Slovenes have?
It varies from context to context. If I speak to you as an authoress, of course, I support, love, and enjoy my language, and it's part of my identity. In my everyday life, it's not really. I'm not obsessed with it. I'm not obsessed with the idea of protecting it or shielding it from anything. It's a live matter, of course. But I am glad that people out there have the possibility to read something that was written originally in a very strange Slavic language.
Yeah, yes. One spoken by a couple of million people.
And you. Yes.
Yeah. I think our time is kind of up, and I think we've reached a kind of natural conclusion. So, and I know also there is another event coming up later today.
Yeah.
So you should save a bit of energy.
You too.
So thanks a lot.
Thank you
for answering my questions and talking to me. And I hope all the viewers find our talk interesting. I've enjoyed it, and I hope the publisher's happy with us as well.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for a lovely conversation.
Yeah, and of course, I wish you great success with the book, especially on the international market, and also with your future career.
Thank you very much.
And I look forward to translating some more novels in the future.
Oh, the next one is going to be even harder.
If I'm still around and I'm not suffering from dementia, then I'll take it on. Yeah.
Brave man. Thank you very much. And thank you for the great work you did on the book.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye.